shaft in our entire catalog, and that happens to be the True Temper TT Lite XL R&S Flex iron. One confusing but important note that you may find on steel and some select graphite wood shafts is the part on bore type. This may seem confusing at first, but hopefully it'll make perfect sense once I explain it. Let me flip the screen here. Okay. This is a cross-section of how the shaft looks into the head. The blue illustration is the shaft. In the early days of wood, and actually when the heads were made out of wood, the shafts penetrated through to the sole of the club. We call these through bores. That happens to be the top left-hand diagram. Obviously, there's going to be some extra work involved to finish the shaft to make it flush with the sole, and then to put a plug in the hollow tip steel shaft to prevent any foreign debris from entering. Years ago, a club maker figured out they can reduce the insertion depth so the shaft went down to the very bottom of the sole, but without going through. These were eventually called blind bore and saved time during the assembly phase. That's your upper right-hand corner diagram. In the late 1970s, metal woods soon began to grow in popularity. Aside from their different material and shiny appearance, the insertion depth of the shaft changed dramatically over the wooden clubs of the day. You see, wooden clubs really needed the insertion depth for strength, while the metal woods did not. In those early metal woods, the shaft rested above the ground line by 1.5 inches. Soon a new terminology came out called standard metal wood bore, or short bore, in the lexicon of club making. As we all know, there's nothing standard in the golf industry. But don't assume standard metal wood bore applies to all metal woods. And here lies the confusion. You have certain metal woods on the market that actually are bore-through. Some are like a lot of the Callaways or some Titleist drivers. There's some that are blind bore, and some that fall between blind bore and the so-called standard metal wood bore. What we're most concerned with is the bottom of bore to ground line measurement. When I worked for Dynacraft in the early 90s, we broke it down even further than just standard wood bore. We had M2 bore, and that's where the shaft penetrates to a point 1 inch from the ground line. We had an M1 bore, where the shaft penetrated to a point 1.5 inches above the ground line. And those are our two bottom diagrams here. Now, Hireko still uses these terms today to describe the bore type on all of our drivers in the fairway woods. That information can be found in the specifications in both the print and online catalog. The vast majority of all our drivers are M1 bores, and our fairway woods are M2 bores. But what happens if you're not using one of our heads? Well, there's an easy way to determine the bottom of bore, or the bore type. First, you insert the shaft into the hosel and measure the overall length. You subtract the raw length of the shaft, and this yields the bottom of bore to ground line measurement. For example, say we have a 46-inch shaft. With the shaft inserted fully into the head, it now measures 47 inches. Then we know the bottom of bore to ground line measurement is the difference, or in this case, 1 inch. And that would be our M2 bore. But what happens if the measurement is 47.25 inches, or where the bottom of bore to ground line measurement is 1.25 inches? Well, in this case, it's neither an M1 or an M2 bore. But don't worry about that. We just simply cut off the additional 1.25 inches off of the tip. But only, and I mean only, if there's a trim note 1 or where the manufacturer calls for additional trimming for the bore type. If it doesn't, don't worry. You just follow what the charts call for. Hopefully that made some sense. Okay, now let's go into the irons, hybrids, and wedges.
Actually, let me interrupt you real quick, Jeff. Not to be rude. John asked, bottom of bore to ground line is along shaft line, not vertical, correct?
Correct. It is along the shaft line, just as illustrated in that picture.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. On the bottom of board of ground line measurement on irons, most club makers don't worry about these because manufacturers really don't design shafts for through-bore irons, and the industry doesn't usually deviate much from the so-called standard 1-inch bottom of board of ground line measurement. The only noticeable exception is the True Temper TT Light XL RNS iron shaft only, where you'll actually be trimming additionally for non-through-bore irons. And you ask, what is a through-bore iron? Well, the only current example on the market is many of the Callaway irons, but not all of them. Again, you will not have to worry much about these unless you're reshafting or repairing a broken shaft into one of these clubs. Where you may have to watch out for is adjusting to the trimming is when mixing and matching hybrids, irons, and specialty wedges with the same shaft. In a full set of irons or a full set of hybrids, the bottom of board of ground line measurement will remain normally constant. For veteran or more skilled club makers, they will check the bottom of board ground line measurement of each type of club. Remember how we measure the bottom of board ground line measurement? You insert the shaft in the hosel, measure the overall length, subtract the raw length of the shaft, and this yields the bottom of board ground line measurement. For example, now let's say we have a 41-inch shaft, and with the shaft inserted into the iron head, it now measures 42 inches. Then we know that the bottom of board ground line measurement is 1 inch. But with the same shaft, let's say you insert it into a hybrid, and it only measures 41 3/4 inches. Then the bottom of board ground line measurement is only 3/4 of an inch. If you don't adjust and reduce the tip trimming by this additional 1/4 of an inch, then it's actually going to make the shaft slightly stiffer. This small difference might not be so noticeable that many club makers forego the step, but if you're trying to establish a uniform flex throughout the set, then you want to make this adjustment. Many club makers use a different shaft anyway in a hybrid than they do the irons. In this case, since the shafts don't match, don't be concerned with the differences in the bottom of board of ground line measurement. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have your wedges. If a club maker is adding a specialty blade type wedge to a set rather than matching cavity back irons, you may have some discrepancy in the bottom of board of ground line measurements, because usually these types of club heads have longer hosels on them. Using our same example, you may find that the 41-inch shaft fully inserted in the blade style wedge now measures 42.5 inches. We know at this point that the bottom of board of ground line measurement is 1.5 inches. In this case, we want to trim an additional 1/2 inch off the shaft tip so we establish a uniform flex throughout the set. Again, this is if you're using the same shaft for both the irons and the wedges. Now, what happens if we don't adjust? Then the wedges will play a little bit softer or more flexible than the rest of the set. Since the wedges are often partial swing clubs, this may actually create some additional feel without sacrificing accuracy. But the point I want to make is it never hurts to check and adjust when need be. Club makers will encounter variations in bottom of board of ground line measurement, and they need to know how that affects the flex of the shaft. Okay, the next subject is shaft flex. I'll wait for the screen to change here so you can follow along. Okay, there's two different types of shafts. One is called a discrete flex, and the other is a combination flex, or sometimes referred to as combo flex. With discrete flexes, you buy the flex that you want the club to be. For instance, if you want a ladies flex club, you buy an L flex shaft. If you want senior, purchase an A. Regular R, stiff S, and extra stiff, well, you get the point.